The airport buzzed with the usual chaos, passengers rushing, announcements echoing, and flight attendants checking tickets. But in the middle of it all, a young boy stood frozen, his heart pounding as a woman in a crisp airline uniform frowned at him. "Sorry, kid. This ticket is no good," the flight attendant said, her voice sharp and dismissive. Without another glance, she tore it in half and let the pieces flutter to the floor. The boy's hands trembled. He had followed all the rules, checked in on time, and even double-checked his seat number. But now he was being turned away, just like that. People in line stared, some shaking their heads, but no one said a word. The boy swallowed hard, his mind racing. He wanted to protest, to explain, but the woman was already waving forward the next passenger as if he didn't exist. What she didn't know, what no one in that moment knew, was that this boy's father wasn't just another traveler. He was the owner of the very airline she worked for, and right now, he was only minutes away from discovering what had just happened. The boy took a deep breath. Should he tell someone? Or should he wait and see how far this would go? Because soon, everything was about to change. The boy clenched his fists, his chest tightening as he watched the flight attendant move on like nothing had happened. He wanted to say something, to demand an explanation, but his voice felt stuck in his throat. People kept moving past him, barely giving him a second glance. He bent down, picking up the torn pieces of his ticket. His father had given it to him himself that morning, reminding him to be careful with it. He had followed every instruction, but none of it had mattered. The flight attendant had barely even looked at him before deciding he didn't belong. Taking a shaky breath, he stepped out of the line, trying to figure out what to do next. He could call his father, but he knew how busy he was. His father trusted the airline staff to do their jobs. He never imagined something like this could happen, especially on his own airline. A few feet away, the flight attendant continued checking passengers in, her expression calm, as if she hadn't just crushed someone's travel plans. Did she even care? Did she think he was lying about his ticket? The boy wasn't sure what hurt more, the embarrassment or the unfairness of it all. But one thing was clear: he wasn't leaving the airport without a fight, and soon the whole world was about to find out. The boy took a deep breath and looked around. Other passengers continued boarding, their tickets scanned without question. His heart pounded. Why had his been ripped up without a second thought? He spotted a nearby airline employee, a man in a navy blue suit, standing by the customer service counter. Gathering his courage, the boy walked over. "Excuse me, sir," he said, holding up the torn ticket pieces. "She took my ticket and said it wasn't good. But my dad bought this for me. I'm supposed to be on this flight." The man barely glanced at him before sighing. "You need to take that up with the flight crew. I can't do anything about it." The boy's frustration grew. No one was listening. No one cared. Meanwhile, a woman a few rows away had been watching everything. She was a frequent traveler, and something about the way the flight attendant had dismissed the boy didn't sit right with her. She stepped forward. "Excuse me," she said to the attendant. "Why exactly was his ticket torn up?" The flight attendant stiffened. "It wasn't valid." "But did you check properly?" the woman pressed. The attendant hesitated, her confidence faltering for the first time. Before she could respond, a deep voice interrupted. "What's going on here?" Heads turned as a tall man in an expensive suit approached. The boy's heart leaped. His father had arrived. The moment the man's voice cut through the tension, the entire scene shifted. The boy turned, relief washing over him as he locked eyes with his father. But his father wasn't smiling. His sharp gaze moved from his son's torn ticket to the flight attendant, who suddenly looked much less confident. The woman who had spoken up earlier stepped aside, sensing the shift in power. Other passengers, who had been pretending not to notice, were now watching closely. The flight attendant straightened her posture, but there was a flicker of nervousness in her eyes. The airline employee in the navy blue suit took an uneasy step forward. "Mr. Reynolds, I didn't realize. The boy's father didn't acknowledge him. His focus was solely on the woman who had dismissed his son without a second thought. Tell me exactly why you tore up his ticket, he demanded, his voice low but dangerously firm. The flight attendant swallowed hard, her fingers tightening around the boarding pass scanner. The weight of her mistake was sinking in fast, but it was too late. Everyone was waiting for her answer, and there was nowhere left to hide. The flight attendant's hands trembled slightly as all eyes remained locked on her. She opened her mouth, then closed it, struggling for an explanation. The weight of the situation was pressing down hard, but before she could speak, another voice cut through the silence. "Excuse me, but there's been a mistake." A man in a different airline uniform approached from behind the counter. His badge read *** supervisor ***, and his expression was a mixture of concern and urgency. He glanced at the torn ticket in the boy's hand, then at the flight attendant. "I just checked the system," he continued, looking directly at the boy's father. His ticket was perfectly valid. In fact, it was first class. There was absolutely no reason for it to be rejected. A murmur swept through the surrounding passengers. The flight attendant took a small step back. Mr. Reynolds narrowed his eyes. "So why was it torn up?" The supervisor hesitated, then turned toward the flight attendant. "I'd like to know that as well." Beads of sweat formed at her hairline. She shook her head quickly. I thought there was an issue," she stammered. "Maybe a mix-up in the system." The supervisor's jaw tightened. "That's impossible. I personally verified this booking just this morning." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then the boy's father exhaled slowly, his tone calm but laced with warning. "I don't tolerate mistakes like this," he said, "and I definitely don't tolerate dishonesty." The flight attendant's breath hitched. She looked at the growing crowd, then back at Mr. Reynolds, realization dawning on her. But just when it seemed like the truth was about to come out, an airline announcement crackled over the speakers. "All flights are temporarily grounded due to an emergency." Gasps rippled through the terminal. People grabbed their phones, trying to figure out what was happening. The boy's father's eyes flickered to the monitors overhead, which was suddenly flashing ***CQRITOYALERT** in bold red letters. Something bigger was going on, and whatever it was, this situation had just become much more complicated. The airport terminal buzzed with confusion. Passengers whispered anxiously, glancing up at the flashing ***CQRITOYALERT** on the monitors. The flight attendant took this as her chance to slip away, but before she could turn, Mr. Reynolds spoke again, louder this time. "We're not done here." His words stopped her in her tracks. The supervisor, now just as invested, took out his radio. "I need immediate verification on the security alert," he said into the device. The boy clutched his father's sleeve. "What's happening?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Reynolds didn't answer right away. His gaze was locked on the flight attendant, whose face was turning paler by the second. Something wasn't adding up. Then the radio crackled. The alert was triggered from Gate 12. A voice responded. "Suspicious activity at check-in." Everyone froze. Gate 12. That was *** gate. The supervisor's eyes widened. "That's this flight." Another murmur rippled through the crowd. Mr. Reynolds turned to the flight attendant. "What exactly did you do?" he demanded. She stammered, her confidence completely shattered. I was just following orders." "Whose orders?" the supervisor pressed. She hesitated too long. And then, as if on cue, uniformed security officers stormed through the terminal, heading straight for them. The passengers parted, watching in shock as one of the officers pointed at the flight attendant. "There she is." Gasps filled the air. The boy's breath caught in his throat as two officers reached for the woman's wrists. "You're coming with us," one of them said. Her face drained of color. "No, wait, I was just..." But it was too late. The officers led her away as the passengers whispered in disbelief. The supervisor shook his head. "I should have known something was off." He turned to Mr. Reynolds. "Sir, I sincerely apologize for everything. I'll personally make sure your son gets the treatment he deserves." Mr. Reynolds nodded, his sharp eyes still watching as the flight attendant disappeared around the corner. Then he turned to his son and placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Come on," he said. "We've got a flight to catch." The boy exhaled, the weight of the moment finally lifting. As they walked toward the gate, he couldn't help but glance back one last time. He had come to the airport expecting a simple trip. Instead, he had uncovered something much bigger. And somehow, he had a feeling this wasn't over yet. As the boy and his father boarded the plane, the tension from earlier slowly faded into the background. Flight attendants greeted them with nervous smiles, fully aware of what had just happened. This time, no one questioned the boy's seat. The supervisor himself escorted them to first class, ensuring everything was perfect. Settling into his seat, the boy glanced out the window. The flashing **CQRTOIALERT** had disappeared from the monitors. The airport was returning to normal, but he knew things would never be the same for the woman who had torn up his ticket. Whatever she had been involved in, she had made a mistake with the wrong passenger. His father leaned back, exhaling. "You okay?" he asked. The boy nodded slowly. "Yeah, just didn't expect all that to happen." Mr. Reynolds chuckled, shaking his head. "Neither did I." He gave his son a knowing look. "But you handled yourself well." The boy smiled. He had felt powerless at first, but now he realized something important. Sometimes the truth comes out when you least expect it. As the plane took off, he took one last look at the airport below. This was supposed to be just another flight. Instead, it had become a lesson he'd never forget.